Hello everyone. Welcome to this first of a series of webinars. I'm going to begin with a little attunement in the form of a story. In the ancient teachings and the transmissions given by the Buddha, there's a story of a man who made a beautiful golden statue of the Buddha, and he wanted to transport it across the country. But he was
Richard,
worried about... Yes?
sorry about this. Quite a lot of people can't hear you yet, so I'm just going to stop you there for a sec.
Fine. Hello everyone.
Richard, could you just say a few words and see if people can hear you?
Yes, as I was saying, in the ancient teachings and transmissions given by the Buddha, there is a story. Can people hear me?
Yeah, people can hear you now. I'm going to unmute myself. Okay, Richard.
Okay. Try again. The Buddha in rags. In the ancient teachings and transmissions given by the Buddha, there is a story of a man who made a beautiful golden statue of the Buddha, and he wanted to transport it across the country, but he was worried about robbers. So he covered it in hundreds of dirty old rags. And then en route, unfortunately, he died. And the statue that was covered in rags was forgotten, and it was trampled into the ground where it lay. And then one day, a sage came by, and he dreamed of the golden statue. And he went to the spot where it lay in his dream, and he found the pile of stinking old rags. And one by one, he removed them, until at last he beheld the miracle of the golden statue. And a shrine was created on that very spot, and a legend grew up around it. This very legend that I'm speaking now. And this is the story of each and every one of us. We all have that shimmering beauty hidden somewhere inside us. We have this transcendent, boundless nature rooted in golden truth. And all the time we travel ceaselessly looking everywhere for it. But the one place we don't think to look is here, in the darkest, most wretched, raggedy corners of our being. So know then that you are like that man who had that dream, and you've been shown exactly where to look. And you only have to travel to that spot over and over again and begin to remove the rags. And this is the work that we are gathered here for. And this is why you're listening to these words now, because you're ready. And it's the time for you to know who you really are. So welcome everyone to the first in a whole new series of webinars I'm doing. And the purpose of these calls is really to ignite a fire inside you the individual, and also we the community involved in this work. And this fire is the fire of the inner light. We're going to do some powerful ongoing shadow work, and we're going to labor, and we're going to dig right down into the coalface of our daily lives. And these webinars are going to be spaced roughly between 2 and 4 weeks apart, and they're always going to be thematically linked. And so they're going to connect us together as a community and as a synarchy. And each webinar, the format more or less is going to be, each webinar will have an attunement, like the one with the story I just read, and then a brief introduction followed by a transmission from me. And the transmission will last around 40 minutes. And it may have pauses and it may have headings that give it structure. And the whole thing will be recorded, and we're going to make it freely available. And some parts may be read and other parts may be spontaneous. And each of these transmissions will have its own theme, as well as a practical teaching that you can apply to your life. And this one, as you'll see, is inspired by the teachings of the Buddha. And after the transmission, we'll have a short time for questions and answers, maybe 20 minutes or so, which you can tap into your computer. and then 10 minutes at the end for self-illumination, what I call self-illumination. And that's when I lay out the practical exercise that we're going to be doing in our daily lives. And then I'll do a short closing. So that's the format. 5 minutes attunement, 45 minutes transmission, 30 minutes questions, 10 minutes self-illumination, and then closing. So that's how it is. So I'm going to begin with the transmission. The three jewels. You know, I've long been a lover of the teachings and the transmissions of the Buddha. And although I'm not very well versed in Buddhism itself, I do love, and I've always felt, the vast presence of the Buddha himself. And broadly speaking, you could say that his transmissions fall into three categories: Theravada, Mahayana, and Vajrayana. You know, everyone who follows my teachings knows that I love threes. Theravada, the teachings of the elders, is arguably the purest form of the Buddhist teaching. It was brought out and transmitted through the original forest mystics in Burma and places like that. These samanas, these mendicants that roamed the forests and meditated usually in the roots of trees. And the approach of the Theravada the goal is to become what's known as an arhat. And an arhat is someone that's self-enlightened, self-awake, self-illuminated. And so drawing from the Theravada tradition, the first jewel is awareness. And awareness is the secret to Theravada, because it's awareness of clinging. They call it upadana, clinging, how we cling to the form. And the way in which you release that clinging is through awareness. And then there's the Mahayana, the great vehicle, so-called. And it's the most popular form of Buddhist teaching. And it includes the teaching of awareness, but it adds very deeply the teaching of compassion. And that's not to say that Theravada doesn't have that, but in the Mahayana tradition, compassion is everything, because out of that tradition comes the tradition of the Bodhisattva Vow. And the Bodhisattva Vow is the man that says, or the woman who says, I will hold back my illumination, my enlightenment, until every other being in the universe is enlightened. So it's a deep, compassionate view. So the second jewel of this transmission today is compassion, awareness and compassion. And then the third element of the Buddhist teachings is called Vajrayana, the thunderbolt teachings. They're the most esoteric, and they're rooted mostly around the Himalayas. The Tibetans, the tradition is rooted very strongly in the Vajrayana. And it was allegedly brought here by Padmasambhava, a great teacher. And you'll also find it not just in the Buddhist, but the similar esoteric tradition is also found in other Himalayan schools like Kriya Yoga. And it's a tantric teaching, and it contains the knowledge of the subtle bodies, alchemy, the refining of essence. It has many, many techniques. And the jewel of the Vajrayana is transmutation. So these three jewels are really, really important. Awareness, compassion, transmutation. So hold them close to your heart, because we're going to use all three elements in our practice. The 64 faces of attachment. So hopefully, Anton, my wonderful business partner, will have put up a piece of paper, a list of 64 victim states that relate to the gene keys. And on that page, if he's not done it, if you can't see it on there, then he will have put a link so that you can go and find it somewhere. And each one of those gene keys, has a victim state. It has a shadow state, as most of you will know, because every gene key has a shadow, a gift, and a siddhi. And these are the bands of frequency that are found inside our being, inside our bottoms, so inside our bodies. So we have these layers and levels of consciousness that are available to us. And the shadow state, the lowest frequency, is about being a victim. And these 64 states of victimhood, they represent the many faces of clinging or attachment in the human genome. So we contain them all in our DNA. And you don't need to be depressed about that, by the way. You don't have to work on all of them. The root of our attachments, though, forms organically when in a sequence while we're still in our mother's womb. And then they begin to unravel, and as soon as we're born, they come into play. So in a way, no one escapes this wheel of samsara. And when you look at the gene keys wheel, which you'll see around your profile, if you've got your profile, that wheel represents the wheel of samsara, the wheel of reincarnation. So we're born, we form attachments, and we die. And then we're reborn, because an aspect of our consciousness that survives death then takes form again because of these subtle attachments, these shadows. I call it sometimes the causal atom, that part of us that survives incarnation, relatively speaking. So when you look at that list, that's a very powerful list to work with, and you can apply it to the gene keys, and you can apply it to your profile, and they're really touchstones. So it's not absolutely definitive. They're contemplations. They're a starting point. They're entry points into a matrix where you can find your own way through deeply contemplating them. And look at the shadows of the gene keys, and then look at these victim states, and you'll see there are the many ways in which we cling to aspects of life, of the form. Using the 3 jewels with the golden path. Some of you, I know, will have started the golden path, and the golden path is a program that I've created that allows you to travel through your profile, your gene keys hologenetic profile, which you can get for free on the website if you haven't already. And then the program guides you using the gene keys book as part of the map, step by step through your profile. And it's so one of the keys to doing this is to have an understanding of your profile, and that's where I recommend that you begin with part 1 of the program, which also you can access through the website. So what I want to say is that you can use awareness. That's the first thing, the first of the 3 jewels. So take awareness, and you can use this list to watch your own life. So you might want to begin with your own activation sequence, which is the first sequence in your profile that you come to. So take the gene key of your life's work, for example, and look at that shadow and look at its victim pattern, and use this jewel of awareness, and just see when you're playing the victim. I mean, here's an example from me. I have the shadow of confusion, right there. That's my life's work, the shadow of confusion. And so there are times in my life when I enter into states of confusion. And that may not be mental, it may be emotional, it may be physical. Often confusion is a state that spans the whole spectrum of dimensions. And it's like any shadow state. It's like going down a wormhole. You don't really know what's going on, and you don't know how to get out, and it's very uncomfortable, and you can't see the light. So all these shadow states are deep, and the trick is to catch yourself before you react out of the shadow. So before you react out of that victim nature. So if I can see myself deeply uncomfortable with that state of confusion, I want it to end, for example, I want it over, so I try and find some way of ending it, or I try and find some way to get out of it. and the gift frequency of imagination and illumination feels like it's shut down. The trick really is that awareness, just the awareness of I am in confusion. I don't have to be a victim of this confusion, though. It's just there is confusion, and confusion, like everything, will pass. It will move on. And this is where you come to the second jewel, compassion, because once the awareness allows you to see the victim state, you can be compassionate with yourself because you know it will pass. And so you can be patient and allow. In the Gene Keys, we have this wonderful technique of allowing, accepting, and embracing. So when you identify a pattern, when you identify that you're in one of these states, the first stage is just allow it. You don't have to like it, but you have to allow it. Just allow it. It's very soft, allowing. It's very breathable. And then the next stage, after you've allowed it for a certain period of time, is accepting. You accept it. It comes deeper into you. Oh, I'm in confusion, or I'm in reaction, or I'm in whatever the shadow state is, whatever the victim state is. Powerlessness. And then the final element is embrace. And when you really begin to embrace it, that's a magical moment, because when you embrace the shadow, love comes out, because you actually, that's when you vaporize it. It comes, that's when the transmutation occurs. This is the tantric path. You can actually use the laser of the mind to shower that shadow in light. So you use your awareness, but you can also use your imagination, and you can always also use this deep longing inside you. And transmutation is always something that takes place in the solar plexus, in the belly. So here's a practical tip, is hold the belly. Shower it with love, with softness. Just hold yourself. Give the shadow a face, perhaps, and let your heart melt it. That's part of the Tantra. Call upon your siddhis. Have you ever thought of doing that? Call upon your siddhis when you're in a victim state, because those siddhis represent the angelic higher frequencies of light, the language of light. And you can actually invite them. You can invite them as though they are separate angelic beings, which in one dimension, that's exactly what they are. You can call them in. You can implore them for help because they're real. So that's transmutation. Awareness, compassion, transmutation. And that's how we vaporize the victim. And this word vaporize, it recalls this metaphor in the Gene Keys book, the Dragonfly, where the water element is transmuted into the air element through the element of fire, the sun. So most of you know the story of the dragonfly. I've told it many times. It is just the metaphor of the dragonfly's life cycle. Who lives? The dragonfly lives as a nymph under the water, as a separate, independent creature, and then at a certain point in its life, several years, it suddenly decides to find a stalk of grass or a reed, and it crawls up that reed out into the light. It's never ever done anything like that before. It just does it, and the moment it gets out into the sunlight, the light starts to work on it, and it starts to open up its back, and it starts to split, and the water pressure, the hydraulic pressure of the water that is inside it, actually forces the wings of the dragonfly open. And of course, it takes to the air. And it's a wonderful metaphor for how our awareness, our compassion, and our transmutation works on these shadows inside us. It's not a complicated thing. It is very, very simple. The other thing that is of key importance about this work of transmutation, and I really want everyone to understand this, and it's a really good piece of news. The shadow is finite. It is a finite pattern. It is a finite entity. Whereas the siddhi is infinite. And that means that transmutation is also finite. So as we work, the vaporization takes place until it's finished. One day it's complete and we are fully awake. And the gift in the middle is the interface, the gift. So as you work through your golden path, you will find that these extra keynotes, these victim states, they add another layer. So when you come to your Venus sequence, which is the emotional component of the golden path program, you will see that you've entered into a subtler emotional clinging, because there's physical clinging, and then the deeper layer is emotional clinging through our desires. And it's about clinging to patterns that keep the heart closed, patterns that we learned when we were young, essentially, when we learned even in the womb, but also later in our childhood. So that's emotional clinging. And then the final aspect of the golden path is the pearl, and the program takes you through these layers. The pearl is even subtler because it's the mental clinging, and the ultimate mental clinging is the clinging to the belief that you are separate, to the belief that you actually exist as a separate, independent being. So it goes on getting deeper and deeper and deeper. And this is really what I wanted to share with you today, is this list, and for you to look at that and contemplate it and use it, use your imagination with it, play with those terms, open them up. Perhaps you'll find more in them than I have. I've just begun an exploration, but I hope that they will help you with this work as you apply it to your profile, as you apply it within the Golden Path program. Because it's the Golden Path program that really takes the transmission of the gene keys and brings it alive for us in our lives. So it's essential, really, at some point, that we commit to that next step. It's nice to taste the water, see whether the gene keys are something that you can begin to work with. Initially, there's often a confusion. There's so much to take in, and that's completely normal, but it is a phase that we move through. And when you stay with that, you will eventually, your perseverance will take you through, and at some point you will have an insight, a true insight, through this knowledge, through this wisdom. And once you've had one of those insights, suddenly the gene keys are alive for you and you're off. It's like you're running. It's like you're on the bike, you've learned how it works, you're free, you're in the system, you're traveling with it, it comes alive for you. So I encourage everyone to keep persevering, and the next phase I want to talk about is what I call self-illumination. And in the I guess the Buddhists and people like that, they would call this sadhana, the sadhana. And sadhana, one of those wonderful words that means many things, but essentially self-illumination is not a bad interpretation. It can mean spiritual work. So this is our sadhana, this is our self-illumination for the next 2 weeks. And I set a structure on it and a time, because in 2 weeks' time I'm going to deliver another one of these, and we'll take this and move it further. So for the next 2 weeks, I'd like us all to take a gene key in our profile, or it doesn't have to be in your profile, and look at this list and begin to play with this list and look and apply it to your life, and see if you can catch yourself playing out the victim. Anton and I were just having a joke before this call, because we had some technical problems and we were going, oh, you have technical problems, are we going to be ready on time? And we were, of course, just ready on time. And we said, well, what victim was that? I said, it might be the victim of structures, because we were in that process of, oh, luckily it resolved itself happily. So let your intuition guide you in this process, and keep loose, keep soft. You needn't get tense. People get tense when they're doing shadow work, and it's not the right approach at all. I would say give 10% awareness to the shadow and 90% to the gift and the siddhi. And if you're getting tense, it's because you're giving too much to the shadow. It's just a light attention that you need to be giving it, and give yourself a break. I recommend doing this visualization or this contemplative practice early in the morning and in the evening, maybe 10 minutes each, more if you're up for it. And if you wish to do it, the ideal is that you get it into your daily life. And then you also allow yourself pauses so that you can integrate the changes as you're vaporizing the victim states. Because you're going to see, as you start working with this, it will bring you breakthroughs. It's done it for me, it continues to, and it's very powerful. You'll be working on deep karmic patterns, both individually, but also we'll be doing this as a collective, and that adds to the power considerably, because there are 500, 600, 700 people who will be doing this for the next 2 weeks, and we are a collective. And so the importance of holding the belly and being with the belly and being soft, and those three jewels: awareness, compassion, and transmutation. And have fun with it. So that's the transmission. I'm going to open up for any questions. That was a little shorter than 45 minutes probably. But if anyone wants to ask questions about the list or anything I've said or the Golden Path program or any aspect of the Gene Keys, I'm available. I'm just going to wait so that Anton is going to field some of the questions for me. Are you there, Anton?
Hi, Richard. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Good. I'm just waiting for questions to come through. We've got a sort of 15-second delay or so.
Okay. Oh, well, I like delays.
Pauses.
Yeah.
We have a question that's quite a common one. Where in the Gene Keys are the 6 lines discussed? That's one that's come in.
The 6 lines. The book is too big already. If I were to put the 6 lines in, it would have added another 200 pages, which is why I've written Treading the Golden Path, which is the ebook currently that runs through the Golden Path program. So when you begin the Golden Path program, you will see that it has these steps, and each step has a serialized component of that book that goes through every single line and every single keynote. And the program also has guidance and practical tips, and invites you to contemplate and apply the Gene Keys teachings to your everyday life. That's what it's about. So there are these 3 elements: the Gene Keys book, the profile, and the program. It's funny that the one that people seem to miss out on the easiest is the program. We'll try and remedy that. We are often trying to do that, but the program actually contains all the missing information. It's not that it's missing, it's that it's additional, and it increases the enrichment of your journey through the Gene Keys. So the program is the thing, and that talks you through the lines and how to synthesize them with the themes of the Gene Keys through your contemplative practice. Any more good questions?
Okay, Richard. How much do other victim patterns not in my profile affect me?
They all affect us. Every Gene Key affects us because we live in the collective, and ultimately we are a collective intelligence. So it's those victim patterns, those other ones, are all around us. Other people hold them. They're in the auric field of humanity. They're on the news. They're everywhere. They are thematically sort of detonated in our lives through the movements of the spheres, through the movement of the sun. So there are times where all of them we taste all of them. So you can work with them intuitively in that way, just as you can with the gene keys, or you can take the very powerful journey of the unlocking through the activation sequence, the Venus sequence, and the Pearl, which obviously is the journey through your profile. And the journey through your profile is very specific in that it unlocks these primary sanskaras. That's what the Hindus call these sanskaras, which are the wound imprints, the attachments, and how they formed in us as a child in the womb. And so traveling back down through those specific gene keys in a specific sequence is the most powerful thing we can do, which is why I've laid out the program and the profile. Otherwise we wouldn't even need them. But they are this magic ingredient. So it's a good question because they all affect us, and we can use that list in all kinds of ways, just as we can use the Gene Keys book in all kinds of ways. And the primary way I recommend is following the sequences of the Golden Path.
Okay, Richard, a question from Mahalia. When we are in the victim energy, what is one of the aspects in our charts you suggest we focus on?
Well, as I said, when you're feeling that expression, when you're feeling that shadow state, then 10% on the shadow, identify it, see yourself, use that awareness, bring that awareness in, that mindful practice. That's what these victim states are for. That's what the shadow states are for. That's what the whole of the Gene Keys is about. It gives you a mirror. So when you look at, you can take any one of those shadows at random, and you can begin to contemplate it. And if you contemplate it for 3 or 4 days, you will see it everywhere. You'll see it in yourself, you'll see it in others, it'll come flying at you, because that's how magic works. When you put your attention on something, it manifests. The lesson manifests, the wisdom manifests. So 90% needs to be on the gift and the siddhi especially. I lay very powerful emphasis on the siddhi, that when you hold the siddhi in your higher consciousness and you call it in, you have to call it in, you have to invoke it. It's inside you. That's the strange thing. But our way of doing it is to look up. We go, please help. But it comes from inside you. And but there's this feeling that it comes from outside, even though it is both in and out. So the emphasis will be on your gifts and specifically your siddhis. And if you can envelop the shadow in the frequency of the compassion that I talked about, the second jewel, then over time you will experience a transmutation. And that will take place in your belly, in your solar plexus, in your hara. And it's a strange, uncomfortable feeling. But you need to give it time, and you need to surround it in softness, and you need to be patient, and you need to keep calling in on the siddhis, and then that light will eventually begin to soften those edges, and you'll experience that vaporization, which is it's a difficult experience. I experience it as ecstatic. Depends on who you are. For me, it's a rush through my body, through my being. It's a rush of light through my aura. And the more you do it, the more quickly and easily it comes. Hope that answers a little bit of the question.
We have a question from Susan. How does ego relate to shadow work?
Well, it's like I said about the attachments. You look at the 64 attachments. That's what I call the 64 faces of attachment, those victim states. Those are the talons of the ego gripping to the form. And that's if you're looking at the ego. There are many different ways of using that word, but those attachments, those shadow states, are the places where we cling to the form. And you see, a shadow isn't just about a bad feeling. A shadow can also be an addiction to a good feeling, but it's an addiction. It's the addiction that's the shadow, and it is an addiction, and the ego is addictive. And the gift frequency is the loosening of that clinging that I spoke of, the attachment. As the gift is the emergence of the light, the tantric light, through the shadow, through the darkness and the discomfort of the shadow. And so for me, that is the answer, that ego is in the process of letting go. And it's in the deep immersion of the shadow work that we are dealing with the construct of the ego, and it is a construct, which is why I said it's finite. It has a finite existence.
Richard, are you happy to look at a specific one, the shadow of the 37th and the victim of that one?
Yeah, you'll have to tell me what it is, because I haven't got it in front of me. I can't remember them all suddenly.
Okay.
Weakness is the shadow.
37 is victim of your gender identity.
Oh, that's a great one, isn't it? Well, if you read that gene key, you'll see it's all about gender. It's all about yin and yang. And so it depends on you're a man or a woman. There are games that we play and roles that we take on, and they become very, the men are supposed to behave like this, women are supposed to behave like this. But it's not just that. It's a deeper level of gender even than that. But the depending on male or female, we do have these attributes that are part of our gender that make us cling to things. So if you look at you'll have to dig deep on these shadows to find it. But if you think of that shadow of weakness, it's about weakness. And think about the expectations that you have on yourself as a man or as a woman. For men, it used to be we're not allowed to cry. We weren't allowed to cry. And then it was suddenly, it's great for us to cry. Now men can cry. Now men are crying too much. Not necessarily. But it's about being caught by those subtle attachments. And yeah, I think that you're going to have to do that journey yourself. But if you go into that shadow of weakness, you will feel it strongly, because it's every time you yourself are feeling weak, that's when you're going to contact it. And often, when we're feeling weak, we pretend to be strong. And instead of being vulnerable, just being vulnerable. So, yeah, I wish you luck in digging deep into that one and find out what it is specifically for you. But I'm sure you'll find it. Persevere, and you'll have the insight.
We have a question from Cindy. Is there one activation that draws our attention more to the shadow than others? For example, the core wound or the evolution point?
Say the question again, just so I process it again.
Sure. Is there one activation that draws our attention more to the shadow than others? For example, the core wound or the evolution point?
Now I can see where you're coming from. Not really, because when you're looking at the sequences of the golden path and you see those 11 spheres, they're really one sphere. And once that one sphere is quantum, at a quantum level, is enfolded holographically, hologenetically inside itself. So you begin with the life's work, but inside that is the evolution, and then inside that is the radiance, and then inside that is the purpose. And You see what I mean? They are all interdependent, self-encoded, imprinted inside us. But they, as we move through those layers, they take us deeper and deeper. There are points at which the shadow becomes more intense. But as the light inside us opens wider and we begin to breach that root, we are capable of dealing with greater shadow manifestations inside ourselves. So the journey begins with and ends with as much as you can handle, and not too much, not more. So for instance, when you get, well, you mentioned evolution, that's the beginning or near the beginning of the journey, the evolution point. And it is this primary challenge. You've got to crack that nut to just get into the golden path. You've got to crack those first two codes, the life's work and the evolution. And until you really understand the basic shadow patterns of those, you can't really move any deeper. So they're the first place where revelation awaits. And then as you move deeper and deeper into the golden path and you get right down to the core wound, yes, you're moving into the collective DNA of humanity. You're moving into the collective wound, and that's a much heavier, thicker, weightier, meatier thing to take on. I mean, that's some demon, you know, or daimon inside us, and it requires a greater capacity of love. And so but the whole thing is about widening this central channel right through the core of our being, so that light can flow more freely through us as we do this work. So I hope that answers your question. It was quite a good one, actually.
We have two questions from, I think it's from the same person, Dipali. Firstly, can you say how we start with victim list? And the second is, could you speak of the victim of failure?
So we start, Dipali, if that's the right word, your pronunciation, we start with the life's work. So if you get your profile and you go to the very top sphere in your profile, it's called life's work. You probably know this. And you look in there and there's a gene key, a number. And there's two numbers. There's it might be the number 63 and then a dot and then a number 2. You want the first one, 63. The 2 is the line number, which is described in the program. But the gene key is the thing. So you take, if it's 63 or 4 or whatever it is, let's say 32 because you mentioned failure. So let's say it's 32. Then you begin with the shadow of failure. And I'm cunningly going to answer both questions at the same time now. I hope. So you take that shadow of failure and you begin to contemplate it. And you think about your life and you think, well, what is failure for me? What does it feel like? What does it look like? Think about the times you failed or you feel you failed. Think about what you're afraid of in terms of failure and go on a journey with it. Really dig into that theme and then watch for it. Look for it. Look for other people's issues around success and failure, because these aren't just individual patterns, they are collective. And sometimes the collective can give us as much information as ourselves. Sometimes it's an even better mirror. And look in your relationships and think about the many different ways in which you think in terms of success and failure. And you'll see that that is an aspect of clinging. That is a victim state. If you are a victim of wanting to be a success, you're also a victim of failure. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to be a success. But if you are attached to it, that's where the ego comes in. That's where the suffering is. Because then if you don't succeed, you're disappointed. And if you do succeed, you're also disappointed. Have you ever noticed that when you succeed? Afterwards, there's a disappointment. Because where do you go from there? So have a look at the first gene key and the life's work, and also look at the evolution point, which is its pair, its programming partner, and look at those two and contemplate them. And over time, and you can read up the gene key, and you can talk about it or think about it and feel where it goes inside you. And the program will also give you additional insights through the lines, and that will over time open something up for you, an insight, a breakthrough. And when that breakthrough comes, you will know it. Good luck.
We have a good one from Paula. She says, my shadow is victimization in my evolution. Am I getting double whammied with victimization?
Yeah, that was a good one, isn't it? The 55, which is actually responsible for this whole conundrum. Yes, the 55 is special. It doesn't mean that people with the 55 are any more special than the rest of us, but having that one does give you the capacity to be something or become something of an expert in the field of victims. Now, it either means that you are the ultimate victim, or it means that that can become a very powerful part of your journey in life, helping others become free from their victim states. And that can mean many different things. There are many different careers, for example, where people do that. You could be anything from a really good author to you're someone that smashes preconceived notions, an author to a football coach. It's the World Cup at the moment. My kids are watching it all the time. A really good football coach that shows you how to break patterns that are kind of moving against your higher skill. So, I mean, that's a mundane application because it has many levels, but it's a good gene key to think about in a very profound way, because it's the place where the whole genome is opening up, the 55th gene key, which is why it doesn't have a word for the two words for the siddhi and the gift. It's one word, because the siddhi and the gift become one. And that means that the light is entering into the human DNA through that gene key. And everyone that has that gene key has a specific role to play in that, but it doesn't mean that all the others don't. We all have all of them, right? It's in the field of consciousness. I don't have the 55th gene key in my profile, but it's all around me. I have the 55th gene key in my DNA because I have all of them in my DNA. And so it has a very powerful effect. It's where the light is bursting through the most powerfully. So people with that, you will have a very powerful experience with this body of work. In a way, it's meant for you. It's meant for many of us, but it's really meant for you if you have the 55.
Okay. One from Robin. I have the 26th gene key. So is pride the victim of egotism or lack of grit? And am I to be aware of this in my life and practice, then be soft with it and call in the gifts of artfulness and invisibility? I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it sounds good. Invisibility, by the way, is an unusual shadow. It's about magic, that gene key, which is why you'll see the shadow is pride, because magic is about being able to manipulate life, manipulate others at the shadow, manipulate people's feelings, their finances. These are the shadows of that one. And artfulness is when you raise that to a level where love starts to come through. So out through that gift comes the ability to manipulate someone to something good, to manipulate someone so that they open their heart, so that to manipulate someone away from the shadow. And I use the word manipulate in a soft way rather than in a negative way, because we can all kid each other to, once you have this gift of an open heart, which is what happens at the gift frequency, and the 26 gene key has a cunning that goes with it. It has a mastery of sleight of hand, of tricks, of marketing itself, and using whatever skills are necessary to be able to trick someone into the higher wisdom, which is why invisibility and concealment are its ultimate gifts, because that's the master who nails you without you knowing he's nailed you. So that's the 26th gene key. I can't remember the beginning of your question, but I hope that perhaps that short explanation of the gene key will help.
This is, I don't know if you're happy to answer this one, Richard. Slightly different.
Well, you've asked me now. Well, almost.
Could you? This is from Wild Style. Could you talk about the role of amino acids associated with each gene key?
No.
Good.
Only because it's a good question. Thank you for the question. I put them in the book so that people could explore them. And I don't really know the first thing about amino acids. I know I'm not a nutritionalist, I'm not a biochemist, I'm not a biologist, but they do correspond. So I put in the correspondences because I had this instinct that one day that information would be of great use to us. And also I think it's really important to be able to see how amino acid structures, which are the building blocks of our chemistry, are completely tied into these gene keys. And sometimes, recently, I've been describing the gene keys as essences. They're like homeopathic essences or quintessences. And you take them like pills and you put them in and you contemplate them as they go down. And then they radiate a kind of, like a depth charge goes off at a certain altitude inside you at a certain moment in your life, and it begins to emanate and it unlocks something in your chemistry. So it has a very profound effect on our physiology. And to me, I have to say, that is a bit of a mystery, because I'm not trained in those sciences. So I leave it to people who are to explore it and see what incredible, exciting things you discover. But that's the gene keys for you. They're here as a synthesis, unfinished, waiting for you, the synarchy, all of us, to explore them and see what comes out of them.
A question from Catherine. She says, I have the 25th gene key as life's work. Does the victim of constrictive breathing only play out physically, or is there more to it?
Well, constrictive breathing at the physical level is about as deep as any shadow will get. And I want to remind everyone that every shadow is in every other shadow. So they're a hologenetic field. So every shadow state, every single one, involves constrictive breathing patterns. And particularly, it's a doorway through the 25th gene key. It's a doorway through anything for many people to concentrate on the breath. It is the ultimate. It was Buddha's trick, wasn't it, to get us breathing, to get us focused on the breath. There are also all kinds of body work that will lead you into that. But I want you to understand that constrictive breathing goes right to the core of who we are. It's something that we learn from a very, very young age, in our first 7 years of life, when we received our first shocks, whatever they were. We all had them. It's impossible not to. And when we received them, a part of our breathing learned to close down, and those very deep, subtle patterns that are inside us, we can go and reverse that. It's the awareness and compassion and transmutation that reverses that, and it's a journey. So doing this work will change your breath pattern. And that's why the belly is so important, because when you see a baby breathe, they breathe with their belly, with their navel. And our job, if there is such a thing, is to be able to learn again how to breathe like that. But you can't force it, and it will occur on its own as we move through this process of transmuting and vaporizing these shadows. Because as it happens, then the breath deepens and these constrictive patterns are released. It's a miracle, actually.
Okay. A question from Natalia. She refers to you when you talked in the Golden Path about when you approach other people, you concentrate on raising their gift or siddhi. How do you do that?
Hi, Natalia. Well, I would look at when I look at my children, that's what I see. You know, when I look at my son, Magnus, who has the shadow of provocation and the gift of dynamism and the siddhi of liberation, when I see him being provocative, I always try and remember that's just dynamism that's stuck. He doesn't know how to get that dynamic energy into a more creative flow. So there are lots of different ways of dealing with that. You can either go and rugby tackle him, which I don't suggest you do with your clients or necessarily or your friends, but you find the way that is the easiest way that comes as a natural response out of your holding them at a higher frequency. And sometimes it's just that. You just leave them alone, but you hold them and envelop them and wrap them and see them through their higher frequencies. And you really have to look sometimes, you know, when people are really challenging and or really dark people. There are people out there that really have a lot of the shadow, and you have to look deep, deep, deep through the layers to see the chink of light that's in there. And they have never, hardly ever had someone in their life who looks at them that way. So it's a very powerful thing to hold someone's higher frequency around them. It's particularly amazing as a parent because you hold that around your child. It is an unconscious environment in which they then grow up. It's a very, very healthy thing. But for adults, we can also have a very powerful effect on the people around us by holding those frequencies around them. And it's a job we do inside ourselves. It's part of that compassionate view that came out of the Mahayana Buddhists, you know, to see the best in people, to treat them with loving kindness, metta, to respect all sentient beings. I mean, these are the teachings of the Buddha, and they are eternal. They are the deepest teachings there are. So that's how you do it.
Okay. A question from Manjita. My life's work is the 40th gene key, the fourth line, victim of fatigue. And she says, or he says, or I don't know, I've been meditating regularly lately. Would this help to work with this shadow?
Meditation has the capacity to bring you through many different things, and so I would say yes. And it also depends on how you're doing your meditation and whether it suits you and whether it feels right. And there are many different approaches to meditation. East approach is very different from a Western approach, and so you need to find the one that really feels good to you and fits right, and that you're not tensing up. But otherwise, I would say if it's a meditation that involves mindfulness and compassion or transmutation or all three, then it cannot fail to help you move and out through that shadow. To how you will experience over time the dropping away of that fatigue, because that 40th gene key has an enormous power hidden inside the core, like all of them. And that resolve that's in there is throttled by the constriction of the shadow. So awareness will begin to loosen that, and compassion towards yourself and towards others will soften that further. And then transmutation, which is the allowing of that to change on its own, to transmute, is a very, very powerful thing. And you can also, transmutation can either be something that occurs on its own, or it can be something that you invoke. Like I said, you invoke the siddhi. So it depends on your meditation. Any meditation that invokes something higher is a very powerful meditation, but it has to bring together the lower and the higher. So you like I said, you hold 10% on the shadow, then 90% is on the divine will there. You bring in that, well, this is perfect right now. This is divine will. Everything is divine will. It is the will of the divine that I experience this fatigue right now. And that absolute acceptance of that will actually is the very thing, the turbine that will transmute it. So it's very powerful. Yeah, keep meditating.
Okay. Let's see. Oh, a short one from Olaf. What is an impotent mindset?
That's a good question. Did I write that? An impotent mindset. Which one was that? Which gene key was that? Can you tell us? I haven't got the list in front of me.
I'll look it up. Hang on.
Yeah.
It's number 14. 14th.
Oh, yeah, because the 14th gene key is about compromise. So a mindset that's impotent is the belief, the deep-seated belief that we are powerless. It's a deep unconscious belief that we hold that you are not up to the task, whatever the task is. You cannot manage it. You don't have the power. You don't have the thrust. You don't have the competence. That's the gift. You're not rich in wealth of inner strength. No, it is an impotent mindset. It is exactly as it sounds. It is the belief that you're not up to the task, and it's a completely false belief, because every single person is up to the task. But the shadow will have us believe that we're not. The shadow will have us believe that we are a victim, that we cannot get out of this, that this feeling of suffering is infinite, that no one escapes it. And it's not true. It's a complete untruth. It can be transmuted. It's here to be transmuted. It's here to be loved, embraced, and transcended. So, and then you reach the bounteousness of the 14th siddhi. And then you are the king of all you survey. Or the queen, but in your case, Olaf, the king. King Olaf.
Okay. One from Priya. I have the 52nd gene key under Radiance in my profile and the 58th gene key under Purpose. Can you explain restraint and dissatisfaction a little more for me? Does restraint mean holding back, or is it about patience and going with the flow?
Yes, restraint is one of those gifts that doesn't sound so exciting. And I was joking the other day at a talk about when you get those gifts. And often, as Gurdjieff said, when you're looking at the Enneagram, his system, he said the one that you like the least is the one that's yours. And it's not necessarily always the case, but it was a good joke. The gift of restraint You see, every gift has this gift. It's the balance between. In the beginning of the Gene Keys book, the Treading book, I talk about the fire mind and the water mind, the sin and the yi. And the sin is the emotional mind. It's the passionate side of human nature. It's wonderful, it's fiery, it's explosive. And then the yi is the water mind. It's the quiet, it's the contemplative. It is not interested in achievement. It is the allowing, the passive, the receptive. And in that sense, it's the most powerful. And restraint is the balancing of those two paths. And it's more than a balancing, actually. It's the understanding of the correct dynamic between those two paths. The fire mind has to serve the water mind. And the fire mind and the water mind, they are metaphors, obviously, for what Jung called the animus, the anima, the male side, the female side, the poles that are inside us, the right hemisphere of the brain, the left hemisphere of the brain. And the yang must learn to serve the yin. Because if the yang is put in charge, well, we all know what happens, because we can see it every day. It's not a good, pretty picture. The yin, and I don't mean women have to be in charge, obviously, but the yin, mind you, that wouldn't be a bad thing, but the yin is what is naturally the beginning of things. Everything comes from the void. It was one of those jokes about the I Ching that it was someone changed the beginning around, and the first hexagram is the yang and the second is the yin, and it should be the other way around, because everything begins with the yin. So restraint is the balancing, the learning to balance in perfect equilibrium those two states. But it's more than that. It is the understanding that the emotional side serves the quiet, intuitive, wise mind that's inside us, the clear mind, the clear light, the light of awareness. Yeah, so that's restraint. A wonderful gift, a wonderful gift. One of the most sought after gifts in humanity.
Okay. Very short one from Chris.
Yeah, we better just have, I think, a couple more, Anton.
Sure. This one you'll like, Richard. From Chris, how do you contemplate?
It's a perfectly good question. How do you contemplate? It begins with thinking. That's the simplest answer. You begin by thinking. So if you've got we've been doing that. I took the 50-second gene key, the gift. We started to contemplate, well, what is restraint? You saw me do it. I started to think about it and go, well, I'll explore it mentally. So you begin by contemplating on a gene key. And you begin at the beginning, life's work. In your profile, take your gene key of your life's work and begin to think about it and explore it mentally and intellectually. And then as you go on thinking about it over a bit of time, and then you take a break, and then you come back to it, and you take a break, it starts to go in a bit deeper. And soon you will begin to see it's gone into the emotional level of your being. And you begin to see it and feel it, not just think about it. You begin to feel it inside you. You begin to feel what restraint is, for example. And you begin to realize, actually, that's not a tense state at all. That is a very, very balanced state. And you begin to feel when you're not in that gift, but when you're in, I'm just using that one as an example, when you're in stress, which is the shadow. And so you begin to look at the dynamic between the gift and the shadow, and you begin to explore its programming partner in the gene keys, and you can begin to explore all the different connections to it, but you have to then allow it into your body and into your being, and eventually it saturates you so deeply that you have an insight, you have a breakthrough as you go, I know what that is, I know what it means finally, and the penny drops, and that's contemplation. It goes deeper and deeper and deeper in layers. It takes perseverance, but it's a gentle perseverance, because you can go and come back and go and come back, and you can get on with your life, and it goes on all the time underneath. So that's why the Gene Keys is such a big book, because it gives you so much to contemplate. It keeps you sticking around long enough so that you can have these breakthroughs, and they go deeper and deeper, and the more breakthroughs you have, the more light emerges, the more deeply you realize that there's actually only one message in that book. Every shadow contains a gift. Those shadows are finite. You are releasing the light from your core and slowly awakening. We have one more question.
Okay, this one's from V. How do you hold the core wound of the 36th from the shadow victim of turbulence to the city of compassion or self-compassion?
I'm just laughing because the final question about the core wound. For those of you who are new to the Gene Keys and you don't know what that means, as you follow the progress of your golden path through your profile, you will get to this place at the end of the Venus sequence, which is the emotional, heart-opening aspect of the Gene Keys. And in there you will come to this sphere which we know as the core wound. And it's a very, very deep place inside us. So it's worthy of very deep contemplation. And I mean, I'm only just beginning to glimpse my core wound after many years, and it's taken me a long time. And I now glimpse it. Mine is clarity. That's the city. Oh, I know the shadow very well, but to see the city, to see through the city and the gift, intuition, I know that, but the city, it takes time, and you go on working at the rest of your profile, and you go on chipping away at all those Gene Keys and contemplating and contemplating, and somewhere at the core you hold this. There's this special place. You know, what does that mean? And it's in a way the most stubborn part of your whole journey, because it's the core wound. It must be, and it connects you to the collective wounding pattern of humanity. So you have the 36 there. So it's, you know, it's all about being human and being wounded and suffering and really knowing the depths of physical suffering, emotional suffering. And until you really know that and really let that into your body and being, you're not going to fully know what compassion is, because you have to feel it, and you have to feel it in every human being. And you know, you have the city of compassion as your core wound. It's a nice place to end, actually, in this call, but not that I'll do an ending in a minute, but it's a nice place to end these questions, because it's kind of where we began. It's one of the jewels, compassion. It's the central jewel. So it's a wonderful wound. They all are. Of course, you have to go through the intense immersion in the suffering of that wound, as we all do. And that means you'll have to feel it. You'll have to feel the suffering of the world in order to feel the compassion for the world. That is the path of the Buddha. That is what happened to the Buddha. That is what happens to every Buddha. And we are all Buddhas. So thank you for all your wonderful questions. I'm going to do a little closing, and then after that I will vanish into the city of invisibility, and I look forward to meeting you all in another 2 weeks. It's going to be quite soon, and we'll see where we've come to. And so we have 2 weeks to explore this shadow state and the things that I've said here today. I hope you remember the key important things, the jewels, and hold 90% on the city as you go into your life. So thank you for listening. I'm going to go into a quintessence now. Quintessence is the bringing together of the essence of the transmission of this webinar, of this transmission here. So maybe you can take a breath here, and you could even not look at your screen unless you want to, or close your eyes and breathe in to your chest and your belly, and close your eyes and release a sigh. And I want to invite you to open your heart to the figure of the Buddha, the inner Buddha, the soft smile, the perfect mudra of his hands, the tensionless shoulders, the radiant heart, the illumined mind, and enter into his presence. Enter into her presence. And receive these three jewels into your heart and into your life. The jewel of awareness, to show you the nature of your clinging to the form. The jewel of compassion, to give you the patience and the understanding necessary to soften and let go of your clinging to the form. And the jewel of transmutation, the thunderbolt fire of your spiritual yearning for the very highest state of consciousness, the memory of who you truly are. The golden Buddha clothed in rags. And you can use these three jewels to peel off the layers of those rags. Layer after layer after layer after layer, finite layers will drop away. And every now and again, you'll see a glimmer of gold, a sparkle of the quintessence that lies inside you, your Buddha nature. And one day, when you've persisted and persevered in your sadhana, in your spiritual practice, in your self-illumination, there will no longer be any rags. Your love, the fire of your love has burned them all away. So take spirit from this work and this transmission and these gifts that we all carry together. We are a fellowship of light, a global synarchy returning to awaken all beings through a transmutation of the world shadow. And take heart that the shadow is finite and the city is infinite. Take heart from your fellow wanderers. Send them your love and your support as they also tackle these deep shadows from their personal wounds, and together the collective wounds of humanity that are preserved in our DNA. And whatever comes your way in the next 2 weeks, like the Buddha, persevere in your practice of transmutation. And one day you'll find that gold, that you are the Buddha and that the Buddha is you. And that's a wonderful, miraculous day for us all. So I wish you well, and may, as the Buddha would say, may all beings be at ease. And may you all be at ease. And I look forward to our next meeting, July the 10th. Thank you very much.